The Thing, the first movie, was always one of my favorite films. It was pretty much directed by Howard Hawks in 1949 or 50. And it was based on a short story called Who Goes There?
In the summer of 1982, a film opened in American theaters and barely anybody showed up. 4 decades later, it sits at the top of nearly every great horror list ever written. Most people know what they saw on screen. Very few know what almost happened behind it. These are The Thing, 1982. 15 secrets hidden for decades. Secret 15. The 4 alternate endings, and the one universal snuck onto television. The ending that John Carpenter gave The Thing, MacReady and Childs sitting in the frozen dark outside a burning base, both too exhausted and too suspicious to move, waiting to see what happens, is one of the most discussed final scenes in horror history. It was not the ending most people on the production wanted, and Carpenter had to fight to keep it. 4 alternate endings existed at various stages of production. The first was written by screenwriter Bill Lancaster and never filmed. In Lancaster's version, the characters were rescued by helicopter in the spring and greeted their saviors with a line about getting a hot meal. Carpenter considered it too shallow and refused to shoot it. The second was filmed specifically at the suggestion of editor Todd Ramsey, who was concerned the bleak conclusion wouldn't test well with audiences. In that version, MacReady has been rescued and administered a second blood test, definitively proving he is human. Carpenter later described it in interviews as stylistically cheesy. He shot it reluctantly, as a protective measure while Kurt Russell was still available, but never used it in either of the film's 2 test screenings. The third filmed version removed Childs from the scene entirely, leaving MacReady sitting alone at the fire. That version also failed to satisfy anyone, and was quietly abandoned. The fourth, the one that actually aired, came after Universal Pictures executive Sid Sheinberg went behind Carpenter's back and cut a TV version for network broadcast that added a narrator and a different conclusion in which the Thing, having taken the form of a dog, is seen escaping the ruined camp and running off into the Antarctic. Carpenter disowned that version entirely and later theorized that Sheinberg had been angry with him for not taking his creative notes on board during production. The nihilistic ending Carpenter had always wanted, the 2 men, the cold, the ambiguity, survived all of it. The blood test version has never been publicly released. The solo MacReady version remains unconfirmed in terms of whether a print still exists. Secret 14. Kurt Russell was the last actor cast, officially days before filming.
The Thing was, it was a lot of practicals, a lot of puppets, but it was also a lot of the same thing, and it was a gobo with an X on it, or a tennis ball on a pole if you're moving it and following it.
Every major name in Hollywood turned down The Thing before Kurt Russell got the role. Nick Nolte was Universal's preferred choice and passed. Christopher Walken, Jeff Bridges, Sam Shepard, Scott Glenn, Ed Harris, and Chris Christopherson were all considered at various points. The project's status as a horror remake on a relatively constrained budget did not appeal to the kind of actors the studio wanted attached to it. Russell had actually been involved with the production in an informal capacity long before he was officially cast. He had been working with Carpenter to develop ideas for the film. Despite that, he was not formally confirmed in the role until just days before principal photography began on August 24, 1981. The delay was a product of the studio's lingering desire to find a bigger name. When it became clear that no one else was coming, Russell was cast. Each member of the supporting ensemble was paid $50,000. Russell, once signed, received $400,000, a figure that reflected both his status as a Carpenter regular and the studio's recognition that a MacReady-level performance would carry the film. Secret 13. Rob Bottin was 21 years old and hospitalized before the film was finished.
I wanted to make The Thing also never look the same twice, you know, because if we see it again and again and again and again in the movie, you get kind of bored with it, you know, and it just becomes a very familiar, you know, object.
The creature effects in The Thing remain some of the most astonishing practical work in the history of cinema. The defibrillator chest scene, the dog kennel transformation, the head that detaches and grows spider legs, none of it has been replicated convincingly in CGI in the 40-plus years since. All of it was created by Rob Bottin, who was 21 years old when he began work on the production. Bottin spent an entire year on the film, often sleeping on set. He began working on creature designs before principal photography started and continued through the entire 12-week shoot and into post-production. The effects budget, initially set at $750,000, ran over to $1.5 million by the end of production. The escalating cost forced the elimination of certain scenes, including a confrontation between Knowles and a creature the team had nicknamed the Box Thing, a sequence that was written, storyboarded, and then cut when the money ran out. Bottin worked himself so completely into the ground that by the time his portion of the work was finished, he was hospitalized with exhaustion, double pneumonia, and a bleeding ulcer. When he could no longer continue work on the alien dog creature during this period, his mentor Stan Winston stepped in to complete those effects. Winston declined to take a credit, not wanting to diminish Bottin's contribution, and received only a special thank you in the closing titles. Bottin, for his part, was reportedly relieved. After months of building dog-based animatronics, he had no desire to do more of it. The creature designs he produced across the film's runtime, 45 separate glimpses of the Thing in various stages of assimilation, according to Bottin's own count, have never been replicated by digital effects in any subsequent production attempting to update the material. Secret 12. The sets were refrigerated to 40 degrees Fahrenheit and still looked too warm.
My God, what the hell happened here? Come on, Doc.
The Thing was filmed almost entirely indoors, on 6 sound stages in Los Angeles. The Antarctic setting was constructed rather than shot on location, with only limited exterior footage gathered near Juneau, Alaska, and Stewart, British Columbia, in June 1981 before principal photography began. The challenge of making an enclosed studio space feel like the coldest and most isolated place on Earth fell to production designer John J. Lloyd. To maintain the illusion, the interior sets were kept at a constant temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit throughout filming. Cast and crew worked in those conditions for the duration of the 12-week shoot. The discomfort was not incidental. Carpenter wanted the actors to feel cold, to carry that physical reality in their performances rather than simulating it. The breath of the performers in the frigid air became part of the film's visual texture. Years later, discussions about the ending's ambiguity would center partly on the visible breath, or absence of it, from specific characters in the final scene. Secret 11. The only female voice in the film was Carpenter's own wife.
Your move, bishop to knight 4. My move, knight to rook 3.
Poor baby, you're starting to lose it, aren't you?
The Thing has no female characters. None of the 12 men at the Antarctic outpost are women. No woman appears on screen at any point in the film's 109-minute runtime, and no female character is referenced in the story. It holds an unusual place among major Hollywood productions of its era for that fact alone. The single female presence in the entire film is a voice, the voice of MacReady's chess computer, which taunts him in the opening scene when it defeats him at chess, and he retaliates by pouring his drink into it. That voice belongs to Adrienne Barbeau, who was John Carpenter's wife at the time. She is uncredited. The chess computer scene, in which MacReady destroys a machine that has just beaten him, was added by Carpenter deliberately. He wanted to establish MacReady's character quickly and show the audience, before the story had even properly started, that this was a man who responds to defeat by destroying the thing that defeated him. It is a clean piece of character writing, and it is delivered in full by a voice that most audiences never recognized. Secret 10. Ennio Morricone wrote the score, and it sounds exactly like Carpenter.
Anybody see Fuchs?
The driving, minimalist synthesizer pulse that runs through the thing sounds, to virtually anyone who knows Carpenter's work, exactly like a John Carpenter score. It has the same stripped-down rhythm, the same hypnotic repetition, the same refusal to do anything decorative with the music. It was not written by Carpenter. It was written by Ennio Morricone, the Italian composer behind The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, and dozens of other landmark scores. Morricone was one of the most celebrated film composers in the world when Carpenter hired him for The Thing. He was also, at that point, one of the most expensive. Carpenter's decision to hire him reflected the larger ambitions of the production. This was his first major studio film, and he had more resources than he had ever worked with before. What Morricone produced was music that sounded nothing like his own previous work and everything like the director who hired him. Carpenter later said that Morricone had understood precisely what was needed and had delivered it without ego. The score was nominated for a Saturn Award at the 10th Saturn Awards in 1983. Secret 9. The film opened the same day as Blade Runner and 2 weeks after E.T.
Sorry, Mac. You have to move your stuff up. Doc says we gotta lock him up. Stash him in here and lock him up.
I have to talk to you. I'm tired of talking, Fix. I just want to get up to my shack and get drunk.
Mac, it's important.
The Thing was released in the United States on June 25, 1982, the same day that Ridley Scott's Blade Runner opened in theaters. Both films would eventually be recognized as landmarks of science fiction cinema. On opening weekend in 1982, they simply competed with each other for the attention of an audience that was already deeply committed to something else entirely. E.T. the Extraterrestrial had opened 2 weeks earlier, on June 11, 1982. It was already on its way to becoming the highest-grossing film in history up to that point, and it presented alien life as gentle, lovable, and desperately in need of a phone. The Thing presented alien life as a parasitic horror that turned your body against you and made everyone around you a potential enemy. The timing was catastrophic for Carpenter's film. Audiences who had just cried over a bicycle ride across the moon were not ready to watch a man's chest bite off a doctor's hands. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan had also opened the week before and was pulling audiences. The Thing grossed $19.6 million on a $15 million budget and was considered a commercial disappointment. Secret 8. Carpenter considered the film's failure the worst of his career.
The summer of 1982 will bring another thing from another world to Earth. A new telling of the tale is currently being made by director John Carpenter for Universal Studios. Carpenter is considered by many to be the leading filmmaker in the field of terror and suspense, a reputation earned by his previous features Halloween, The Fog, and Escape from New York.
John Carpenter took the reception of The Thing harder than any other professional setback in his career. He said so publicly and specifically in multiple interviews over the years that followed. Coming off Halloween in 1978, The Fog in 1980, and Escape from New York in 1981, he had built a run of films that defined the genre. The Thing was supposed to be the next step. His first major studio film, a larger budget, a serious project he cared deeply about. The critics excoriated it. Roger Ebert, in his Chicago Sun-Times review, called it a great barf bag movie and gave it 2.5 stars. The New York Times called it a foolish, depressing, overproduced movie. Time magazine described Rob Bottin's effects work as novel and unforgettable, but said the film's emotional vacuum made them feel like an exercise in abstract art. Audiences didn't show up in the numbers the studio needed. Carpenter later said that if The Thing had been a hit, his career would have been entirely different, that the choices he made in the years that followed were shaped by financial necessity rather than creative preference. He lost the opportunity to direct the 1984 Stephen King adaptation Firestarter as a direct consequence of the film's poor performance. He went on to make films he genuinely loved: Christine, Starman, Big Trouble in Little China, but he has never hidden that The Thing cost him something significant. After one market research screening, Carpenter asked the audience what they thought, and one person answered, "Well, what happened in the very end? Which one was the thing?" When Carpenter said the answer was up to their imagination, the response was, "Oh God, I hate that." The culture eventually caught up, but it took a long time. Secret 7. The blood test scene used real needles, shot by the camera operator.
Now you.
The blood test sequence, in which MacReady draws blood from each man and applies a heated wire to test whether the blood reacts by running from it, is one of the most sustained pieces of tension in the film. The close-up shots of needles being inserted into arms during the sequence were not performed by the principal actors. Camera operator Ray Stella handled those shots himself, personally offering his own arms and telling Carpenter he could do it all day without difficulty. The practical reason was simple. The close-up needle shots required extremely steady hands and no visible hesitation. Stella had both. The wider implication is that one of the most viscerally effective sequences in the film, one that made audiences grip their armrests, involved the camera operator putting needles in his own arm on a refrigerated soundstage in Los Angeles, casually, repeatedly, while the director watched. Secret 6. The Norwegian camp was just the American camp after they blew it up. The production of The Thing had a budget of $15 million, which was substantial for 1982 but not unlimited. One of the money-saving decisions made during pre-production came from co-producer Stuart Cohen, who observed that the ruins of the destroyed American outpost, blown apart during the climax, could serve double duty. The Norwegian camp, seen at the beginning of the film when MacReady and the doctor fly out to investigate, was simply the American camp set after it had been destroyed by the film's own climactic explosion. The debris was dressed to look like a different facility, and it worked. Universal saved roughly $250,000 on the reuse, money that went elsewhere in a production budget that was already under strain from the escalating creature effects costs. Secret 5. Ernie Hudson almost played Childs. Keith David was a last-minute choice.
Fire's got the temperature up all over the camp. Won't last long, though.
Neither will we.
How will we make it?
Maybe we should.
The role of Childs, the mechanic whose exchange with MacReady in the film's final scene has been analyzed and debated for over 40 years, went through a lengthy casting process. Jeffrey Holder, Carl Weathers, Bernie Casey, and Isaac Hayes were all considered. Ernie Hudson, who the following year would appear in Trading Places and 2 years later in Ghostbusters, was the front runner and came very close to being cast. Keith David got the role after his meeting with Carpenter and the producers. The Thing was his first significant film role, and he came from a theater background that required adjustment. His stage training was in the direction of showing everything, while film performance required the opposite. Richard Masur and Donald Moffat, both more experienced screen actors, helped guide him through the early days of shooting. The performance David delivered, and specifically the economy and weight he brought to the final scene, is now considered one of the more quietly remarkable debut performances in 1980s genre cinema. Secret 4. Donald Pleasance was Carpenter's first choice for Blair, rejected for being too recognizable.
Well, what we got here is what appears to be, anyway, a normal set of internal organs. Heart, lungs, kidneys, liver, intestines. Seem to be normal.
Wilford Brimley was cast as Blair, the senior biologist whose breakdown midway through the film is one of its most important structural moments, specifically because the production wanted someone the audience wouldn't miss. The casting logic was deliberate. They needed an actor whose disappearance from the story for long stretches would not register as suspicious. If a well-known face vanished from the screen, audiences would wonder where they'd gone. Brimley's relative unfamiliarity to film audiences in 1982 made his absence invisible. Carpenter's original preference for the role was Donald Pleasance, his collaborator from Halloween, where Pleasance had played Dr. Loomis. The production decided against him on exactly the opposite grounds. Pleasance was too recognizable. His face carried too much association with Carpenter's previous work, and his absence from scenes would have drawn attention in the wrong direction. Brimley was chosen for his everyman quality, and the film is significantly better for it. Brimley later noted that he was not particularly bothered by the level of gore in the film. He was one of the few cast members who could say that without qualification. Secret 3. British Antarctic researchers watch the film every year as a tradition.
Go get the dog.
The Thing has found audiences in places that might not be immediately obvious. One of the more specific and enduring pieces of the film's cultural afterlife is its annual screening at British Antarctic research stations. Each year, as part of the midwinter celebrations held on June 21st, the shortest day of the year in the Southern Hemisphere and the traditional midpoint of the Antarctic winter, researchers at British stations screen The Thing as a communal event. The tradition has been running for years. The film is watched by people who are doing, in their actual lives, something structurally similar to what the characters on screen are doing. Living in extreme isolation, in severe cold, in a small group, cut off from the rest of the world. The irony of screening a film about paranoia and alien contamination among a group of isolated researchers who have been living together in confinement is apparently not lost on the participants. By most accounts, it has become one of the more cherished rituals of the Antarctic winter calendar. Secret 2. The film was in development for nearly a decade before Carpenter got it.
The Thing is one of the best screenplays I've ever read, and it's unique in a real special sort of way, and I just love it.
The road to Carpenter's The Thing was long. The project had been in various stages of development since the mid-1970s, moving through different directors and writers with different approaches to the source material. John W. Campbell Jr.'s 1938 novella, Who Goes There?, which had already been adapted once as The Thing from Another World in 1951. That earlier film, produced by Howard Hawks and directed by Christian Nyby, had been a significant influence on Carpenter, who had screened it at Halloween parties as a teenager. When Carpenter came aboard, he was determined to go back to the novella rather than remake the Hawks film. He considered the Hawks version unbeatable as a piece of cinema and had no interest in trying to match it on its own terms. The body horror and shape-shifting elements of Campbell's original story, the idea that the creature could perfectly imitate any living thing it absorbed, had been largely absent from the 1951 version, replaced with a more conventional monster. Those elements were what Carpenter wanted. The idea that the creature could be anyone, that no one was safe, that trust itself was the first casualty of the infection, these were the things the novella had given him that no previous adaptation had fully explored. The development that preceded him had generated multiple scripts and approaches, none of which matched what he intended to make. Carpenter was initially reluctant to take the project at all, feeling that the Hawks film was something he admired too much to revisit. It was co-producer Stuart Cohen who finally persuaded him to reread Campbell's original story, arguing that the novella had not yet been properly filmed. Carpenter reread it and saw how he could make a film for his own time, just as Hawks had made one for his. The film that eventually emerged was, in all meaningful respects, his vision from the start. Secret 1. The film is now shown in film schools as a master class in practical effects.
Not breathing! Go into the dock. Get him in here. And bring the others. Now nobody gets out of my sight.
The Thing grossed $19.6 million in 1982 and was dismissed by the culture as a cynical exercise in gore. Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 stars. Vincent Canby at the New York Times called it the quintessential moron movie of the 80s. John Carpenter said the failure hit him harder than anything else in his career, and he meant it. What happened next took decades. Home video gave audiences a chance to watch it without the pressure of competing with E.T. at the box office. Repeated viewings revealed what the initial reactions had missed: the precision of the tension, the intelligence of the screenplay's paranoia mechanics, the extraordinary performances buried inside an ensemble that critics had dismissed as underdeveloped. Rob Bottin's creature effects, excoriated as borderline obscene by certain reviewers in 1982, came to be understood as some of the most inventive practical work ever committed to film. The film is now taught in film schools specifically as a study in practical effects design, in sustained narrative tension, and in how to use an ambiguous ending to make a film stay with an audience indefinitely. At the 10th Saturn Awards in 1983, it received 5 nominations: Best Horror Film, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Music, and Best Special Effects, and won none of them. The culture eventually came around. It just took 40 years. The Thing was made on a refrigerated soundstage in Los Angeles by a 21-year-old effects artist who ended up in the hospital, a director who fought his studio for the ending he believed in, and a cast that included an actor in his first major role playing the most ambiguous character in the film's history. It opened the same day as Blade Runner, and 2 weeks after E.T., and stood no chance in that company. Then it outlasted all of them in the cultural memory of everyone who ever saw it. If this one was worth your time, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another look behind the screen at the stories that shaped what we watched.